end quote. And these are just two examples. Recently, Facebook has taken to banning white nationalists from their platform. If you poke around online, tons of people call me a white nationalist and a white supremacist because I have offered criticisms of the practice of Indigenous land acknowledgements and have cited the statistically backed up fact that white Canadians are becoming a minority in Canada. An instructor at Wilfrid Laurier University, Dr. Christopher Stewart Taylor, used class time in his anthropology class to tell his students that I have neo-Nazi, white supremacist ideologies, which he followed by saying, "I shouldn't have said that, forget I said anything." So, I don't have a Facebook account, but if I did, would they ban me? How many people does it take to smear you as a white nationalist or white supremacist before you get banned from certain online spaces? This committee has noted that underlying their study on online hate is a finding by Statistics Canada that reported a 47% increase in police-reported hate crimes between 2016 and 2017. However, this increase is principally from non-violent crimes. As the Statistics Canada website reads, police-reported hate crime in Canada rose sharply in 2017, up 47% over the previous year, and largely the result of an increase in hate-related property crimes, such as graffiti and vandalism. Now, perhaps you caught this story in the news recently. A couple of months ago, at Laurentian University in Sudbury, a student found some candy arranged in the shape of a swastika on a cafeteria table. This swastika-shaped candy arrangement is being investigated as an incident of hatred and intimidation by the university. However, I do not think that one single isolated incident of candy arranged in a swastika is enough evidence to indicate that anyone is trying to incite hatred, target, or intimidate. This is an example of how the bar for what constitutes hate is too low. I have had so many encounters with the hypersensitivity around what constitutes hate that I know bringing back Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act would be a mistake. It would cast too wide of a net, and extremists who are already intent on causing real-world violence will go to the deeper and darker web to communicate, whilst individuals who shouldn't be caught up in online hate legislation will inevitably get caught up in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shepherd. We will now go to Mr. Robson. Mr. Robson, the floor is yours.
Well, again, thank you very much to the members in the committee for an invitation to speak to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. And I'm here to speak in defense of the very fundamental human right of free speech. I know that all the members here are extremely concerned about hate and intolerance. And I know that you're horrified by the eruption of bad manners and loathsome opinions on the internet. Too often, social media seem to encourage our worst passions. But despite that, and it is a real problem, censorship is not the answer. Now, I know censorship is an ugly word, and it may well not sound to you like what you're considering doing, in part because your motives are good. But censorship is the right word for what happens when government restricts freedom of speech for any but the narrowest of purposes. And censorship is an ugly word because censorship is an ugly thing. There are legitimate grounds for government to restrict freedom of speech. Because the state exists to protect us from force and fraud, it's rightly illegal to conspire to commit crimes. It's illegal to libel or slander people. It's illegal to incite violence, and it's illegal to engage in material misrepresentation. But when government seeks to limit or prevent any communication that does anything else, including insulting or denigrating people or groups, it's censorship. And the problem with censorship is that it cuts the rattle off the snake. It doesn't drain the venom from the fangs. And I want to be very clear here that a lot of the opinions that hate speech laws target are not just factually wrong, they're loathsome. My argument here isn't that neo-Nazis are fine people who happen to be misunderstood by idiots and the hypersensitive. My argument is that in the battle of ideas, truth will prevail. And that when you limit the battle of ideas, you put truth in peril. I don't need to tell you why censorship and tyrannies is bad. They're trying to repress the truth. And I don't need to tell you that if you go online, you'll find yourselves called tyrants and Nazis and all sorts of stupid and moronic insults. But the response to this kind of thing is to rebut it, to refute it, to laugh at it, to shun it. It's not to call a cop. And so what I want to do here, I want to bring up the three arguments that John Stuart Mill made in On Liberty back in 1859 against censorship of unpopular ideas. And it's important to be clear, it is censorship of unpopular ideas that we're talking about. There's very little occasion for elected governments to try and censor popular ideas. But what Mill said is, first and most fundamentally, an idea that people don't want to hear, an idea that is unfamiliar and upsetting might turn out to be true. I know you're not worrying about that when it comes to online hate, and there's no reason why you would be. But we have to protect freedom of speech because we might be wrong. We've been surprised before, and we don't have the wisdom to know in advance what ideas we shouldn't silence because we'll eventually realize they were right, and which ideas we can safely trample underfoot because we know they're wrong. But of course, there are ideas that we would stake our souls, if we have souls, on being wrong. Not just being erroneous, but being vicious. I don't know because there are certain things you don't want on the record of the committee, but I'm going to say it out loud. Here's some ideas that are so wrong that you might be tempted to say no one can say them. Hitler should have finished the job. Blacks are inferior. That kind of stuff. There is no possibility that we are going to realize one day, oh yeah, that was true. We shouldn't have been so blind to it. But this brings me to the second of Mill's arguments in favor of free speech. It's the Dracula effect. Of course, he didn't call it that because Bram Stoker hadn't written his book yet. But it's the principle that sunlight destroys evil. That the way we get at truth is to speak out against error, denounce it, and refute it. The open societies are a gigantic gamble that truth has nothing to fear in a contest of ideas. And the trouble with censoring hateful speech is that you drive it underground, where it isn't exposed to sunlight, where it isn't refuted, where it isn't ridiculed, where it isn't shamed, and where people are not shown the error of their ways, because we want to rescue the haters as well as protect society from hate. If you keep it off the open internet, it goes into the dark web. It festers and it breeds in dank basements. So, and it even lets haters wrap themselves in the mantle of martyrdom. You don't want to do that in the name of truth. And the third point that Mill makes is that if you live in a society where the conventional wisdom is not challenged, even things that are true tend to be accepted as kind of stale dogma, not as living truths. But when you hear correct ideas defended, when you defend them yourself, they become vital and living parts of your life. They become something that you act on, something that informs your existence and makes it better. Now, censorship doesn't really work. It didn't even really work in tyrannies. I mean, censorship in the Soviet Union allowed communism to last longer and in the end to collapse more disastrously. But it also didn't work in Weimar Germany. Weimar Germany had laws against anti-Semitism, and they didn't stop Hitler. What do people say in retrospect? They say we should have listened to what Hitler was saying. I meant to bring a copy of Mein Kampf as a prop. I'm afraid I got busy this morning and forgot it. But it belongs on every educated person's bookshelf, because we need to know what hate looks like. We need to know how it could once have prevailed, so we know how to fight it in others and in ourselves. I once assigned it as university text. I thought it would make a great headline, you know, right-wing professor assigns Hitler text. And don't even think the kids read it because it was so long. But the one thing I wasn't worried about is that they'd read it and become Nazis. And you should not worry that if Canadians are exposed to hateful speech online, it will turn them into haters. It'll do the opposite. It will anger them. It will lead them to speak out against it. It will lead them to think more completely and thoroughly about tolerance and to be more tolerant people. There are a lot more things I could say, but I'm not going to steal my fellow witnesses' time. But I want to quote Queen Elizabeth I. At a time when religious differences threatened bloody civil war, she said, "I have no desire to make windows into men's souls." That the state can prohibit acts of violence is very clear, and it's an essential duty. That the state can prohibit incitement to violence. If someone stands on a street corner and says, "Kill that capitalist," they're going to get arrested, and they should get arrested. But if someone stands on a street corner and says the only solution to the ills of capitalism is violent proletarian revolution, they should not be arrested. Because we don't need censorship to protect us from force and fraud. And we certainly don't need it to protect us from truth or error. We are adults. In the free societies from the time of Galileo and Socrates, our heroes are those who challenge conventional wisdom, shock reputable opinion, outrage their neighbors, and question authority. Most of them turn out to be cranks and they're forgotten, but some of them turn out to have been right. And when you try to silence opinions you don't want to hear, we pay a huge price in truths we don't hear, and we drive untruths underground, and in doing so, we strengthen them, we do not weaken them. Free speech lets us discover unexpected truths. It lets us refute error. It lets us live in the truth of our beliefs. It's a vitally important human right, and I implore this committee to uphold it in all its messy glory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Steyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Monsieur le Président, and also to the honourable members of the committee. I am honoured to be here. I would just like to say a quick word on the, as much as I always enjoy seeing Miss Raitt, about the defenestration of Mr. Cooper from this committee, which I understand is the business of the members of the committee. But I am concerned. I was driving into Ottawa listening to my old friend Evan Solomon on the radio, who was arguing that, in fact, it was perhaps time for Mr. Cooper to be booted from caucus. That is actually the age we live in, where people can have one infraction and their life implodes, their career implodes, they're vaporized for it. And that is actually one of the most disturbing trends on the free speech issue. The surviving vice chair of this committee said recently that Jordan Peterson should not be permitted to testify to this committee. Bernie Farber, I believe just last night, said Lindsay Shepherd should be booted from appearing before this committee. Ms. Shepherd and Mr. Peterson are law-abiding Canadian citizens, and this practice of labelling people and demanding that they be instantly deplatformed, booted from polite society is in fact more serious than some of the other matters before this committee. I was here last time round, 10 years ago, when we got rid of Section 13, because it was corrupt in absolutely every aspect of its operation, from minor bureaucrats indulging strange James Bond fantasies and playing undercover dress-up Nazis on the internet, to pathetic rubber-stamped jurists who gave Section 13 a 100% conviction rate that even respectable chaps like Kim Jong-un and Saddam Hussein would have thought was perfectly ridiculous. The worst aspect of it was secret trials. Secret trials in Ottawa, not in Tehran or Pyongyang, but in Ottawa. I discovered it one evening before dinner, and I emailed my friends at Maclean's and the eminent barrister Julian Porter, whom I see the Prime Minister recently retained as his QC. That's how respectable he is. And Julian, in a couple of hours, wrote a motion referencing Viscount Haldane and Ambard versus Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, real law, not the pseudo-law of Section 13, and did what John did. Julian's motion opened up that dank, fetid dungeon of pseudo-justice to the public, to the people of Canada. And after 20 minutes in the cleansing sunlight that John talked about, the unimpressive jurist in that case, Athanios Hadjis, decided that Section 13 was unconstitutional and he wasn't going to have anything more to do with it. Sunshine works. The most important aspect, well, we're quoting judges. John Moulton wrote a famous essay a century ago on the realm of manners. And he said the measure of a society is not what one is forbidden to do, which is to murder and steal and rape, and not what one is compelled to do, such as pay the taxes or